Good evening and welcome to the Oxford Holocaust Memorial Event Series 2022, supported by the Oxford Research Centre for Humanities as part of the Oxford Humanities Cultural Programme. Each year on Holocaust Memorial Day, we come together to remember the 6 million Jews who were murdered during the Holocaust and the millions more who've died and been persecuted under Nazi persecution and in subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. The theme for 2022 is One Day, encouraging us to think about the individual days in history that hold extreme significance, those days when life changed for the victims of genocide, as well as the day in the future without genocide to which we all strive. But one day also acts as a somber reminder that the day will come when Holocaust survivors are no longer around to share their powerful testimonies. On that day, it will fall to us to tell their stories. Because although 77 years after the end of the Holocaust, its history and its memory remain important for a society that faces rising anti-Semitism, contemporary genocide, and international humanitarian crises. Learning and reflecting on the Holocaust encourages us to consider what we want our common future to look like. This series, aware that one day survivors will not be around to tell their stories, asserts the responsibility of younger generations to carry their memory. That's why we are overjoyed to have with us today Dorit Oliver-Wolff. Dorit is a survivor of the Holocaust in Hungary, who became an international pop star after the war. In this event, Dorit will share her incredible life story. Aged just 6, she was forced into hiding as Jews were rounded up and deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau from Hungary. Her story is one of danger and narrow escapes during the Holocaust, followed by a remarkable journey through post-war Europe. Author of the book From Yellow Star to Pop Star, which is available for purchase, and if you're interested in having a copy, please do contact me through the university address that you would have seen on the programme and in the emails that I've been sending. In this book, you'll read about how Dorit's incredible character shines through everything that she does. As a note on that, aged 83 in 2019, she appeared on the television show First Dates Hotel, something I'm sure we can all enjoy hearing about later. If at any point you have questions for Dorit, please do put them in the Q&A box on the Zoom webinar. At the end of Dorit's talk, we will hear from Caris Howell, who is a master's student at Worcester College in History here at the University of Oxford, and a regional ambassador for the Holocaust Educational Trust, who will be asking some of those questions from you to Dorit as we engage in the discussion around Holocaust Memorial Day. But first of all, we're excited to share a video featuring Dorit about her story, which we will do so now. And immediately after that video, we will hand over to Dorit to talk about her experience.
Well, tomorrow is Holocaust Memorial Day, a time to remember the millions of Jews who died at the hands of the Nazi regime. But one pensioner from Eastbourne lived through it, and her story is dramatic. It even has a soundtrack to go with it. It's not every day a former pop star visits your school. Dorit Oliver-Wolff has come to St Paul's Catholic College in Burgess Hill to talk about her life. But her journey to get here is extraordinary.
And this was one of the songs that I sung in 1961. That was my first hit.
Her childhood was a world away from the students listening today. Hers is a remarkable tale of war, near death, glitz and glamour. Dorit was a young Jewish girl, just 5 years old and living in Hungary when the Nazi regime started to spread across Europe.
You know about the Holocaust, and I wish I wouldn't.
Originally from Yugoslavia, Dorit and her family fled Belgrade when war broke out. But they were split up, and she and her mother found themselves in Hungary.
When you were running and hiding from the Germans, where was your father? Did you ever know?
My father was taken into a forced labor camp where they were hacking stones. I don't think my father even had a duster in his hand ever before. By the time he was 30, he was worked to death.
Dorit and her mother spent the entire war in Hungary, where anti-Semitism was rife.
One day we were walking to a park. Budapest is full of beautiful parks. And when a big fat blonde woman crossed the road, looking me straight, walking towards me like that, and I was a tiny little girlie, she spat in my eyes and called me Büdös Zsidó, which means stinking Jew. And I didn't understand how you assimilate stinking Jew. Why do you have to be stinking if you are Jewish?
There was mounting hatred towards the Jewish people. Millions were sent to concentration camps, so Dorit's mother decided they would hide the fact they were Jews.
My mother refused to wear, or let us wear, the yellow Star of David because my mother suddenly reinvented herself and became a Red Cross nurse. But that was a very good disguise, if you like.
Constantly on the run and in fear of being found out, they moved from house to house. But a neighbour realised Dorit was Jewish, and one day while her mother was at work, she was caught and put into a sorting house for concentration camps. She spent over 2 months there on her own.
One lady there, I don't remember her name, at night, when I was crying because I missed my mum, she would take me into her arms, and she comforted me. And one day, they took her as well because the soldiers used to come in and you, and they went, and they never came back. She never came back.
With the help of a guard, Dorit escaped and was reunited with her mother. They fled to another city in Hungary, Pécs, not knowing that the Nazis had captured thousands of Jews there, and they were soon arrested. While her mother was questioned, Dorit confronted her captors.
I got up, went to the desk, pointed at the photo frame. "Are these your children?" And he said, "Yes, they are my 2 daughters. They must be the same age as you are." Oh. And then I said to him, "Are you going to hurt my mummy?" He said, "Scheiße." He went around, beckoned my mother out. He said, "Come here." And she says, "Not all of us Germans are nasty swines." And this is why I try to believe that there must be a little bit of good in people. And I like to believe that not every person who sent these people to the gas chamber enjoyed it.
Having narrowly escaped death twice, Dorit's ordeal wasn't over. As a homeless refugee who'd had little food, when the war ended, 9-year-old Dorit weighed less than 3 stone. But it was singing that kept her going.
When I was afraid and I was alone, hidden somewhere, I sang. And when I was hungry, I would invent and sing songs. And all I ever wanted to do is really become a singer one day.
Oh, yes.
After the war, Dorit went on to study at the University of Munich, where she sang in jazz clubs. She was discovered by the North German Broadcasting Company and was signed to a record label. Suddenly, Germany couldn't get enough of her.
On a nice blue autumn weekend.
Many of the young German Air Force had me as a pin-up in their lockers. And everywhere was my picture. And I thought, my hand, do they know that I'm Jewish? It was a funny feeling, you know, but it was the day I became their pin-up.
And as their pin-up, Dorit was invited to sing at a concert for the airmen and their families.
I peeked through the curtains. The women had the most elegant evening dresses on, but the gentlemen had their uniforms on. I thought I'm not going to be able, because suddenly it was not an audience anymore. There were the German soldiers there. And as a finale, I said, now I'm going to choose a very special song for me, which is Havana Gila, which is a Hebrew song. They all got up and sang the song and clapped their hands. And I just had this amazing feeling of triumph. And when I sang, and I remember putting my arms up and thinking, I made it. You didn't manage to kill me. You killed all my family, but you made me a star. That was, I think, one of the most remarkable and memorable shows I ever had.
Dorit moved to England with her husband in 1962. She was convinced she would have the freedom to live the life she chose here, and also the freedom to tell her story.
It was just generally really interesting to hear about how someone can survive something like that.
She didn't have any anger about it. She more or less was more passionate about it and her experiences. And I thought she spoke really well.
Dorit's written her memoirs, and she hopes they can serve as a reminder of a chapter of history she thinks should never be forgotten.
I just feel that there are so many people that I would like to tell them, look, there am I went through this, and I have seen that. But there is life after it. Make the best of it that you can. It's not that I want to remember, believe me. I just cannot forget.
Now, if you want any more information about tonight's show, you can visit our Kent or Sussex websites, and you can watch the show again on iPlayer if you go to bbc.co.uk/Inside Out. Coming up next week, regeneration.
Thank you, Dorit. Over to you.
Well, at least you know a little bit about my history. Otherwise, we would have had to spend a lifetime telling you about it. Thank you so much for inviting me. I feel very honored and humbled that you will listen to my story. And basically, one of the reasons that I feel the urge that I have to talk, I am talking on behalf of those people who can't talk anymore. And also perhaps to remind all those who are watching that the people who were killed and murdered, they were not criminals. The only thing that was against them in that time is that they were born Jewish. Surely that can't be a reason that you have to murder people. And unfortunately, it hasn't stopped there, because the anti-Semitism is still here, it's still going on, and people have got this anti-everybody. People seem to be anti. And if people would only realize that their lives are just as much in danger as your or mine, because people could just turn against somebody else. I would like to share with you my story, which is all true, of course. And I hope that people will then think about it, that there is almost life after death, as that everybody is equal and we all have the same right for life and living. There are not many of us Holocaust survivors left now, so it's rather advantageous that we can still talk and say, because it's one thing to read it in the paper or in books, and it's another thing that you could ask questions after. Thank you very much, Barnabas Balint, that you invited me. And thank you, all of you, for listening. And as I say, after, please feel free to ask any questions you like. Okay, here we go. If you start with Against All Odds. Any minute now. Click. Ah, you see, that was my brave little mom. Her name was Zita Magda, and it was me, and I was 2 years old. I started life as in a very cushy background in a way, because my mother was a ballet and arts teacher in the Yugoslav court, and she taught ballet and music to the king, to Yugoslav King Peter of Yugoslavia, and all the children there. And of course, I was there and I learned. By the age of 4.5, I was dancing for King Peter's, well, the young Peter's birthday. He was only 14. Next. Click. Aha. Now you see, that was me at my 5th birthday. As you see, I was already a bit stage struck. And that was, of course, the last niceness in my life, my 5th birthday. Little did I know what is expecting me after that. This was in Belgrade. And if you see in the background up there, there is the cake. And I think that was the last cake that I had for about 4 years. Next, please. At that age, as I was 5, the war broke out in Belgrade. Belgrade was carpet bombed overnight, no warning, no nothing. I remember my mother and I waking up, coughing, and not being able to see anything because the smoke and the fire were coming through the window sills. And the room was full of smoke, and we just had to try to run out of the building. There were 20 of us, our 20 families, and we all tried to run out into the street. And as we eventually got out, it was like a stampede, but they were not buffaloes. They were all poor, bombed out people at 4 o'clock in the morning. None of us had time even to get dressed. And in April in Belgrade is really cold. But we were all running for our lives. And as we were running towards the woods, away from the fire and the burning houses, the planes would come down very, very low. And out of the windows with a machine gun, they would shoot all the running people. I remember my mother telling me, just don't let go of my hand. Whatever happens, hold on to my hands, which we did. But you see, every now and then, when the Stukas came down and the machine guns, we all threw ourselves onto the floor, and usually grown-up people would then put themselves over the children to protect the lives of the children. And at one of those occasions, there was a big air raid, and all the machine guns came down, and it was panic, and people were throwing themselves on top of me because as I was a child. And I remember holding my mother's hand. And of course, when it's over, then you get up and try to walk, but I couldn't get up anymore. And eventually there were people above me. All I could feel is this very, very sticky thing over my head, which was smelling funny and tasting quite sweet. And then they pulled off these dead people above me. And to my greater shock, I was not holding my mother's hand anymore, but a dead person's hand. And then my mother got me and tried to clear off the blood with her nightie. She spat on it and cleaned my eyes off of blood. The rest of them, I must have looked like I was painted by intention red. But in time, I tried to wipe it off. We reached the woods, which was full of partisans, and they were offering us food. And of course, because we had nothing much except pajamas on, they gave us blankets and they cut the hole out in the middle so we could wear it as ponchos. But of course, because I was teensy tiny, they had to cut a blanket in 4, and that's what they put on me. And we spent about a few days with the partisans, and many, many people, of course, went back to Belgrade into the city, hoping that the houses were still safe. And of course, they had families there. But my mom and my grandmother, they were Hungarians. They came from Budapest. So decided that they're going to walk from Belgrade to Budapest. There were no trains anymore then. So we were walking most of the time, and every now and then there would be some kind of a cart from some peasants, and they would just let us sit in the back. And eventually, I don't know how long after we got into Budapest, my mother got herself a job as a teacher, but of course, being an originally Hungarian, there was no problem. We rented a little house, little flat, I mean. And for the first 6-7 months, it was very normal. My mother was teaching, my grandmother was with me, and it was nice to get away from Belgrade, which was, of course, burned down. And then one day my mother took me to a park. By that time, I was about 6.5. This is the picture how I looked like then. And Budapest is full of beautiful parks. And so we went to a park for a little walk. And then this great big woman, blonde, big, of course, I was so little, everybody was big, approached me and straight looked at me and spit in my eyes and called me Büdös Zsidó, which in Hungarian means stinking Jew, which of course you heard before. But of course, until then, I didn't know we were Jewish because we were not religious. And in Yugoslavia then, people didn't make such a big hoo-ha about religion. You could be a Muslim, or you could be Orthodox Catholic, or Christian, or Jewish, or religion was not a big deal. And so because we were not religious, I didn't know at all what kind of a religion. Religion didn't matter to me anyway. So when this woman called me Büdös Zsidó, I said to my mother, what is Zsidó? She said, I'll tell you later. And the other surprise I had, my mom was a very feisty, exciting young lady. And the fact, if anybody would insult me, she would be like a lion. She would just smack them in the mouth or kick them where the sun don't shine. She would not stand there and just wipe the spit out of my eye. She squeezed my hand so hard, I remember that I thought she's going to break it. And we turned and we walked as fast as we could out of the park. Yet out of the park was a different world. Suddenly, we went into the park like mother and daughter to enjoy the beauty of nature. By the time I got out of the park, I was abused as a stinking Jew. And when we reached the streets, they were full of tannoys and cars and big vans full of writing on them. These are the stinking Jews, and terrible caricatures of Jews with lots of money and long noses and hunchbacks. And you have to kill them all because they are stealing our money. The reason that Hungary and the world is so poor is because of the stinking Jews who are thieves. And people were on the streets shouting, down with the Jews, let's kill them all. So they joined in the mass hysteria. And my mom and I didn't know what it was all about. So ignorance is bliss, actually. But my mother went into the first jeweler shop and purchased 3 crosses. A third one, of course, which she wore was, of course, much bigger than ours, which I didn't think is fair at that time. And then she said to me, I talk to you at home, but if never ever tell anybody that you know anybody or that you know what Jewish is. I said, but I don't. She said, keep it that way. So we went home, spoke to my grandma. She was not super religious, but she would light 2 candles on every Friday on Shabbos. And she would then do her little bit with the candles and put her hands on her face. And she was praying a lot, loudly to God. Half the time I didn't understand why, because God never answered back, but she liked it, so it was okay. And then when my mother, we sat down and we had a very serious talk, and she explained to her what happened in the park and how dangerous it is now, how dangerous it is to go out and anybody to find out that we are Jewish, we would have to wear this little cross. And we have to find a way to hide and never to mix or talk to anybody and just let them know that we are Jewish. In the same times, the law came out that everybody had to wear a yellow Star of David, which I will show you in a minute. But the worst, I mean, it's quite funny now. When my mother gave us all the crosses, I was quite happy because it was a lovely little piece of jewelry. But my grandmother, she said, oh, my God will punish me. This cross will burn into my skin. I will have a burn sign there because the Jewish God is going to punish me that I'm wearing a Christian sign. And then my mother must have said to her something that Jesus was Jewish as well, which of course she didn't understand. So this is the age where I was first and I don't see on it why. I think there was a lovely girlie, and I don't see anything horrible that is stinking Jew on it. Next one, please. Next slide. You see, that was the yellow Star of David, which says Jude in the middle, which said Jew. Now you had to sew it onto your dress or jacket. If you wore it, then you were a target. Anybody could spit at you, kick you. You were not allowed to walk on the street. You had to walk where the horses and the carts were. You were not allowed in shops. So you were persona non grata. If you were caught without it, and yet you didn't have the papers, that you would be deported to a prison or concentration camp or beaten or terribly punished. But my mother decided that one way or another, we are not going to wear the yellow Star of David. Next, please. That was my mum, and she reinvented herself. She reinvented herself like a Red Cross nurse. And that was a magnificent disguise because she put a bandage around my nose, and to make it authentic, she would occasionally cut a little bit of her finger and squeeze the blood and dab it around the mask so it should look authentic that I was bleeding. And we would walk, we would have to mingle with people in stations, in railway stations, bus stations, everywhere where there are lots of people, so we wouldn't sort of stick out like a sore thumb, you would say. We left my grandmother at home mostly, because 3 people would be, you can't, if you walk with 3 people that you are already looking like a group of refugees, we couldn't ever carry anything with us. So we would just roam and walk around. And of course, Budapest was full of plainclothes agents provocateurs, those people who were actually in the soldiers, but they were civilians. And they would, of course, check your papers. And if you had the wrong papers, then they would have a whistle, and straight away you would have a van to pick you up. And as soon as my mother would see a couple of those people who looked like civilian police, she would go up to them and said, excuse me, sorry to trouble you, but here are our papers. Could you check them first, because I have to take this little girl to the nearest hospital. She just had a terrible accident with a shrapnel. Oh, no, we are not looking for you. We are looking for the stinking Jews. Now, the papers that my mother was flashing in front of the noses, they were false papers. And of course, they let us through. And how my mother did this, it is just amazing. She was only, by that time, she was only about 25, 26. She had been very young. And so she also joined a group of people who were saving the children out of ghettos. There was another young man who was dressed up as a doctor, and they would have a white, like a Volkswagen van with a Red Cross on it and the Swiss flag, and with some kind of a false paper, they would go into, they used to have these yellow houses, the Jew houses with the yellow star, before people were put to a ghetto. And of course, she also went into children's homes because they had some amazing, horrendous things invented. And she would then take those children out and take them to the Swiss consulate. And later on, she did really have to work as a Red Cross nurse because there was such a shortage. And because she wore the uniform, she would be stopped very often on the street and called in by the first aid people to help. At that time, she was only able to put a plaster on, but she learned very quickly. And when she worked as a nurse, she would take me with me, but I would be hiding. She would hide me. If she had a room, if she worked overnight, she would have a room where she would stay. Then I would be bedded between the mattress, and underneath the mattress, there is some kind of a chicken mesh. So I would lie on that mesh with my nose so that I could breathe, and the mattress and the rest of the bedding would go on top of me. And every now and then, every few hours or an hour, she would come, and through a straw, I would have a bit of drink. And if I had to go for a pee, then I was allowed to pee in the sink. Of course, she ran lots of water to it, so, but I was only 7 years old or 6 years old. And then very often, the best place to hide was near the boiler room because it was quite warm there. And sometimes I would stay hours and hours and hours because she said always, I will always come back. And of course, I was always so frightened that one day she might not come back, and who will find me? So this all the time, this fear, but so far she kept her promise. Next, please. And that was me. Again, of course, I was about 7 here almost. My mother decided that she's going to rent a room somewhere because we didn't want to go back where my grandma was, because the neighbors would then talk. As a single Hungarian woman, like my grandma, she was not suspicious, so people left her alone. And my mother decided perhaps it would be quite a nice thing for a month to rent a room somewhere so we could have a hot bath, and she would work and I would be there. And the landlady was particularly lovely. She said, oh, what a lovely little girl she is. And oh, beautiful green eyes. And she even brought me biscuits. And then about the 3rd day later, out of the blue, the 2 doors opened and 2 ginormous big men dressed in black leather appeared with bayonets. And the lovely voice of that lady, I was not a beautiful green-eyed little girl anymore. She said, this is the stinking little Jew. She is polluting the air. Take her away. Just get rid of her. She's hiding. And of course, these 2 people took me away. They kept on asking me about my mom, and I told them I don't have a mom. I lied. And of course, I just didn't want them to take my mother away. And then they took me into this so-called concentration camp. It was some kind of a pre-concentration camp before they decided where the rest of the people are going. And I remember being sort of pushed around up to the 2nd floor, and they opened this big door, and there were about 200, 250 adults. No children, I was the only child, and as they opened the door, it was like being in a zoo, and they all stared at me. And they kept on asking me, what is my name? Where do I come from? And do I know you? And I just told them my name, and that was it. But it was terrible because I was very frightened. I didn't have my mom there, and they were all adults. And every few days, the guard would come and count to 10, you, and every 10th person would take 10 people then would be taken out in the yard, and we could hear how they would be shot. So we never even knew who was shot. And I was there about 3 months all by myself. There was one lady who at night would hug me and keep me comfort. And I would only cry at night when nobody saw me, because I wanted to be very brave during the day, and I didn't want anybody to see that I am sad or I'm crying. And one day the guard came, one of the guards who was working there, and he said, don't look left or right, don't let the people see that we are talking. So I was very suspicious already. I said, what is he trying to do something to me? She said, I have a message from your mother. Well, of course, that made my ears straight away listen. I said, well, your mother said that you are very clever and that you are going to do what you are told, and you're very brave. So I thought, yeah, that's me. So tonight, he says, when the lights go out, you are to ask the guard that you want to go to the toilet, because you see, we couldn't just go when you wanted. You had to ask the permission from the guard. So you ask to go to the toilet, but you don't go to the toilet. You go 3 doors behind from the toilet. That's the coal cellar. That's where we keep all the coal. You crawl behind it and wait for somebody to knock on the door. Now you see, next to the this pre-concentration camp, there was an infirmary. And the infirmary was keeping all the people who were so dead, so ill, excuse me. I get very emotional when I talk about it. So these people were not given medication. That was too expensive. They were not given any food. That was too expensive. And so they just let them die. So they would lie in those beds for about a week without food, and they would pee and poo in the same bed where they spend it. And about once a week, they would take the sheets away and take them and burn them somewhere. Now, I only found out about it later what it was. So I was waiting there behind the coal cellar, and I was very surprised. There was an apple there and a blanket. I must say the blanket did smell a bit, but it was warm and I was cold and frightened. You see, there is one thing that I need to tell you. There was an amazing thing that I had during all that Holocaust. I had this ability to build a cocoon around me, and I always sang. When I was hungry, I would sing. When I was afraid, which most of the time I was both, then I would sing. And in that cocoon, I was not that frightened little girl. I was this person who is dancing and singing. And I invented lots of songs, and I was in a different world. And basically, I think that saved me through the most difficult times, because I pretended all that around me didn't really happen. They said that about Walter Mitty, but I did it much earlier than Walter Mitty. Maybe he read my memoirs, but it was an amazing to have this talent. And I don't know where I got it from. I think I even have it today, that I escaped into it sometimes. Perhaps I'm 25 again, then I don't know. Anyway, so singing basically kept my life alive. And when I was behind that mountain of coal and I was frightened, I'm sure that I was singing and singing and singing. And I thought, they got me here under false pretenses, because nobody's ever gonna, and nobody's gonna even find me where I am. But alas, the door, I heard some knocking on it, and there was this great big basket, linen basket. And as soon as the door was open, it was this ammonia blinding me. That's when I realized that there were the soiled sheets from the infirmary next door. It was full of poo and full of pee. It was still wet. And by the time that the chappie said something to me, I could not breathe anymore, because my eyes, they were just blinded. So he poked around and made a room for me. He says, you have to lie on the very bottom of this, and I will pull the sheets all over you. You must not breathe through your mouth, he says, because you choke. You must inhale through your nose and then also breathe out also through your mouth then, but never inhale through your mouth. And because it was like a woven basket, it was sort of porous. So he said to me, put your nose as near to at the end, at the wall of the basket, because you can breathe a bit, he says. And when we get down to the main entrance, they are testing, they are looking for hidden people that will poke around these bayonets. And I hope that nobody's going to poke into you. But if they do, don't make a sound, because they will kill you and me. So there I was there, trying not to cough because I was choking. And eventually we did get to the front door, and I could find them talking. They were talking and joking with each other. And the bayonets were sort of just missed me. And then I could also hear this heave ho, heave ho. They threw this little linen basket onto the outside waiting camion vans. And I also noticed that there were quite a few. So it must have been at least 10 baskets there, because I could hear them rattling. And after a while, this lorry stopped, and the man who was a driver came out and got me out beyond from these sheets. I could, by that time, I think I was half out. And he picked me up and he said, you're the bravest little girl I have ever seen. Of course, it was lovely, but I could still not breathe. And then he took me down, and there in the middle of nowhere, about 4 o'clock in the morning, it was still dark. There was my mummy waiting, little mummy. And she gave him a bundle of something, it must have been money. And all I could remember, we kissed and cried and cried and kissed. And I will never, ever forget that moment, because I just thought that I will never see my mum again. But she found me. And I knew it, she would maybe find me, but I just hoped so. And the last words that I remember, this lorry driver said to her, don't go back to Budapest, because there are everywhere posters looking for you and for your little daughter. Go wherever you can, somewhere else. Take the first train. So we did do that. And we went into a place called Pécs. And little did we know that about the day before, they killed about 1,000 Jewish people straight on the streets. We didn't know that. Now, my mother also belonged to an underground organization through which we used to get a bit of clothing. Every now and then she was passed on a tiny bit of paper, which she would then eat so that nobody could find it. And that's how we could have different places where we would stay. We never knew where we would stay. We never knew where we would be. Now, because we were hiding, we didn't have any coupons for food. So we didn't have any food. So my grandmother and I used to go out at night to scavenge around dustbins, usually around big hotels, schools, and some big houses. But we would never pick up any meat, only vegetables, mostly peeling of potatoes and bread crust and all sorts of things. And then my grandmother would go home and boil it for hours and hours. Our main food was basically hot water and toast. If we were lucky, we would have a little bit of oil, and then we would put a little bit of garlic in the oil and dunk the bread. And then, of course, what we ever could scavenge at night, we would then eat that. And it was horrendous. It was horrendous going out on the street to see people being shot, people being kicked, people being taken from one place to, shoveled around with a bayonet. And I mean, ignorance is bliss, because I didn't really realize what it was. I only knew it was terrible. And I only knew that I was terribly afraid. And then there were many, many incidences where we were picked up, and somehow we must have had a guardian angel, which was my mum. And eventually, just before the war ended, 9 months, we were bombed out of the place where we lived, where grandma lived. We were completely bombed out. It was a derelict building, but the cellar was still intact. So mother decided, and grandma, that we would go and hide in the derelict, bombed out house's cellar. And there were about 20 other families from all over around it, because it was the only cellar that was still livable in. And because it was a bombed down ruin, nobody would ever think that there are some people hidden underneath it. So that's where each of us had a little corner. And I think my mother managed to have one of those old steel beds with a mattress on it. And we used to be on top of it or underneath it. But we made it into our little corner. And she had a sheet with some kind around it. So it was like a tent. And that's where we spent most of the time together. And at night, after the air raids and everything happens, each strong person from the cellar, they would go out in little groups. And obviously the shops were bombed, and they would go out, and whatever anybody could get, rice or potatoes or sugar or blankets, we would bring it back and share it. And I remember one day, one of the people came with a great big black bag full of fur coats. But of course, we couldn't eat the fur coats. But my grandmother was terribly, terribly happy to have a first coat in her life. So she said, don't mind being hungry, but look what I got here. So this is how we lived, and we didn't eat very much, and we didn't have light. But needless to say, people asked me to sing. And it was good because somebody, if I sang something, they would give me a cube of sugar, sometimes a slice of apple, sometimes a little bit of bread. So I sang for my supper already. But as 9 months is a very, very long time without proper food, I got pleurisy and pneumonia. I lost my hair, and I was bedridden because I couldn't stand up to walk anymore, but I could still sing. And we had many, many air raids, and the whole cellar was shaking, and everybody was huddling together and said, come on, Doriska, give us another song. So she did. And again, my mother was very clever. She made it all into like a fairy tale, and we would play hide and seek. You know, when I used to go with her to work, we would play hide and seek. And sometimes I said, I wish I wouldn't have hidden so well because she can't find me. And in the cellar, there was another lady, she was a doctor. And I overheard my mother, the doctor lady talking to my mom. And she said, look, you have done marvelously to save your little daughter, but I'm afraid she's not going to do more than another 6 months. It's a miracle that she can even breathe with her pleurisy and pneumonia. And she's 3.5 stone. I mean, she looks like she's a skeleton. And I overheard that. Now, for me, 6 months meant nothing, but I just thought that if I don't make 6 months, I will never be a famous singer. So I said, well, dying is not an option. So I didn't. You see? Next page, please. And eventually, there was knock, knock on the walls. You see, Budapest was built on catacombs. And there was knock, knock, knock on the wall, and one brick came out and another brick came out. And eventually we saw a face, a red face of a soldier with a red star, red star. And of course, he wasn't speaking neither Hungarian nor German. And he was shouting, "Здравствуйте, здравствуйте," which means in Russian, hello. So the Russian army liberated us. And it was also quite, because the first Russians who came through, they were the Mongolian volunteers. They didn't have uniforms. They just joined the army so they could have some food. And of course, they were not trained in the army. They were just sort of unskilled soldiers. and they have never seen a European woman or anything. And it was also quite a catastrophe because as they came through the cellar, they raped the women and some of the men. My mother, me, and my grandma, we hid under the bed and pulled the things, a blanket over us so it didn't notice us. But then the screams and the yelling was horrendous. And then the proper Russian soldiers came and they shot the Mongolian rapists. And that was also quite horrible because then suddenly you had all these corpses lying there and lots of blood everywhere. But we were so happy to be liberated. We didn't even understand that they were liberating us because as we didn't know what Russian was, we were petrified that this is another lot of Nazis that don't speak German or Hungarian. But eventually, because my mother spoke Serbian, she could interpret, because Russian and Yugoslavian are sort of similar, more so similar than Hungarian and Russian. And eventually we understood that they are our liberators. And we were then allowed to go back to Yugoslavia, where my family came from, Serbia. My grandfather was Dr. Zygmunt Handler. He was a county judge and a solicitor, and he had a family, and they all died. We went back because we hoped that we would be liberated and united with our family. But I found that I was the only one who stayed alive. But again, I didn't have much hair and I couldn't walk. And the children made fun of me, and the children spat at me, and the children threw stones at me when I was in school. So I refused to go to school. When we arrived to the big house that my grandfather had, needless to say, there was nothing there because the neighbors very kindly nicked everything. And they said, oh, we are saving it for when they come back. But that was rubbish because they just stole it. And my mother borrowed 2 partisans with machine guns because she was a big hero by then. And she went from house to house and picked everything up that belonged to my grandpa, including the big Steinway piano. And when she brought that Steinway piano back, I started one finger, then with 2 fingers, and eventually I could accompany myself to sing. And as I didn't go to school, I was reported to the local authorities because you have to go to school. And then a couple of inspectors came and asked me why. And I told them that not enough that I just came out of a starvation, and they saw me that I didn't have any hair, but I'm still being called a bloody Jew. They are still throwing stones at me and making fun of me, and I don't want to go to school. So she said, well, what can you do? So I said, well, I can sing. So I sang a few songs and I played a little bit of a piano, and they clapped, and I didn't know that I was good, but I just, spent time, I liked it. And those 2 people gave me a state scholarship to go to Montenegro to the music academy. And by that time, my hair grew a little bit. My mother also bought me a false hair, and I put on a little bit of weight. So I started to learn how to play the piano, and a new life started for me in Montenegro, in Cetinje. And this is how my schooling started. And then, of course, it happened that all the Jewish people were allowed to emigrate to Israel. I was just about 12 years old. And of course, we all went to Israel, my mom and I. Of course, we were on that ship called Radnik, and the ship was, over 1,000 kids were on there. And we were so many people that ship was so full that you could practically, it was not even legal to have so many people, but what the heck, you only have got one chance to get out of the country, communist country in those days. And it's the first time that you went somewhere which you could be Jewish. And as we arrived just before Haifa, we were not let in because the British government or the soldiers didn't let us in as refugees. So we were sent back, but we didn't have any petrol or gas or whatever the ship is running on. So we sort of stayed a little bit outside Haifa. And of course, the children, we got dysentery and cholera. And then on humanitarian grounds, the UNESCO let us back into Israel. And we were there when Israel was born. On the birth of Israel, we arrived in Haifa. And it was absolutely wonderful. And I just couldn't believe it, that everybody was, that the taxi driver, that the road sweeper, everybody was Jewish. I would spend my time walking around. When the bus driver, I pressed like this on his shoulder and I said, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" He looked at me. "Of course I'm Jewish." I said, "Sorry." And people on the street, it took me months to realize that everybody was Jewish. And I was just so elated. I kissed the ground because I was at last not a stinking Jew, because everybody was a stinking Jew. So it was lovely. So my mother decided, I went to a kibbutz and I learned Hebrew. And that's why I got my name Dorit, because I was born with this terrible, dramatic, old-fashioned name Theodora, which in Greek means present of God, which I was, of course. But I was only tiny, and Theodora is like the big Valkyr, you know, I mean, Isidora Duncan and all that. And in Israel, when I went to my first party, I was about 12 and a half. You know, in those days, my mother didn't even let me go to the party until the school kids came and said, "We are in Israel now, and we can do whatever we want. And if she wants to go to a party, you can't stop her." My mother, it didn't go down very well with my mom. She was a bit of a control freak. But anyway, and then we discussed, they said, "You're such a lovely little girl, but Theodora doesn't suit you. That's very sort of Theodora." So I said, "You should be called Dorit." I said, "What does Dorit means?" They said, "Well, Hador is the clan in Hebrew, and Dorit is a diminutive, a little clan." And I thought, and I said, "Dorit, Dorit, Dorit." Oh, it was like a glove. Suddenly, I liked me being Dorit. And from that day on, not only was my name Dorit, but I felt like a Dorit and left Theodora behind. So my mother decided to go to Istanbul. She married a German prisoner of war straight after the war, which I was petrified. And suddenly my mother used to be my God, my hero. And when she married this prisoner of war, I didn't have any respect from her. I couldn't bear for her to touch me or kiss me. She was a harlot to me. I mean, how can anybody, after everybody was killed by the Germans, how could she marry? And she explained to me that not every German is bad. And she tried to she said, "He is very nice," and tried to understand. If you hate every German, then you can't be surprised that every German hates the Jews. Well, whichever it is. When we used to have dinner, I used to look at him, and my mom used to say, "Darling, this is very rude. Why are you staring at Werner?" That was his name. I said, "Mommy, I am not staring at him. I am killing him. I'm murdering him." She said, "But why would you do that? And how are you doing it?" Well, she said, "I read it. If you concentrate, you could switch a light bulb on. Or in my case, if I keep on looking at him and say, 'Die, die, die,' he's going to die." Well, I did it for 3 years and he didn't die. And I noticed that he was really a lovely friend and he became so helpful. So, another sip. So we went to Istanbul because Werner got a job to become the contractor for Hilton Hotel in Istanbul. So my mother put me into a Catholic convent school. So I had to learn French. And as I already had the cross, she didn't have to spend more money on another cross. But when I was 14, the police came to pick me up and throw me out of Turkey because I was stateless. I didn't have a passport. My mom had a German passport because she married Werner, but I didn't. So the policeman who came to pick me up, he had papers to throw me on the first border, which for a 14-year-old European girl to be put on an Iranian border would not have been very advisory for any little girl. And so my mom bribed the policeman and got a paper from the German consulate and got me a ticket to go to my stepfather's parents to Augsburg, Germany. And because I was stateless, so I was there for a year, and I used to go to ballet school and learn everything. But I had to go back to Istanbul because I had to finish my A-levels, because without it, I can't go to university. But you couldn't go anywhere without a visa. So as I was in Germany, the only way I could go to anywhere abroad would be if I would be a trapeze artist, a circus performer, a fire swallower, or something arty, because you could go then on artist visa. And one day there was in the newspaper an ad that they are looking for ballet dancers. So I went to the audition and I got the job to the Istanbul theater. So off we went, 11 other German girls, very young, and German girls are sort of all quite well endowed, and I was a very undeveloped little 16-year-old. And then we had in Leotard our first rehearsals in the theater. And I can assure you, I stood there and they all looked at me and they said in German, "What the hell do you think you are doing here?" I said, "The same what you are doing here." She said, no, look at us. We have tits, you don't have any, you're flat-chested. We have tummies, you have no tummy. You barely have a bum. I said, well, but I am qualified, I have got a diploma, I'm a ballet dancer. You are what? I am a ballet dancer. Ah, ha, ha, ha. They all started to laugh. You didn't look at the contract, we are all belly dancers. Well, I burst into tears. She said, well, you don't have a belly, she says. Who on earth is going to pay money to see your flat chest? They come to us because look what we have to wibble. And they did their own wobbling bit. And I did admit they had amazing bits to show because I didn't have any of it. And when I started to cry, they all came and hugged me and said, don't worry, we understand. I told them that I have no passport and this is what I have to do. Oh, well, we didn't know that. So one of the girls gave me her bra, because I didn't need any, and they filled it out with cotton wool and they put it on me and they dressed me up. I never even, with all sorts of things. They put false eyelashes on me. And by that time I had over my shoulder long hair. And next time I looked in the mirror, I was a proper belly dancer, but I didn't recognize me. So this is where my double life started. This picture that you are seeing here, I was this girl during the day in the convent school with my overalls, doing my A-levels. That it was between 9 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And then, could you click now? And this was me from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock in the morning. On the very left side, this is me on the bottom, you see? And that was me as a femme fatale with fishnet tights, false eyelashes, and false boobs. Next one, please. And of course here, can you see the harem scene? This is when I was the belly dancer. I am the one behind the blonde girl. And if you see, she's hiding with her arms my flat chestness. We were best friends. And every time we had to have a photo shoot, she stood in front of me and flashed her boobs so that I could hide my flat chest. So this was my double life in Istanbul. And then one day, and of course I sang all the time. And one day I popped into the theater and there was a microphone and the spotlight there and there was nobody in the whole theater. So I sneaked there, touched the microphone and it did, and I said, hello, hello. And I could hear my own voice through the tannoy. And I said, oh, I've never heard that before. So I started to sing. I never heard myself through a microphone, through a loudspeaker. And it sounded really quite amazing. I thought, ooh, you can sing properly. And then I sang a couple of songs, and I hoped very much nobody would ever notice me, you see. And then somebody was clapping. And he says, don't stop, don't stop. He said, you have got an amazing voice. Oh, I said, I'm ever so sorry, but I didn't ask them. No, 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 don't even talk about it. You are amazing. And he said to me, and then when he came closer to the stage, I remember that he was a director of the theater. He says, how would you like to have a little spot every night after the first curtain call? I said, well, of course, I only know 2 songs. He said, don't worry, you learn quickly. So from that night on, what would you like me to advertise you as? I said, I don't know. Anything but the flat-chested belly dancer. So he laughed. He said, okay, leave it to me. So I saw then in the evening in the program, The Voice, Dorit, The Voice. So overnight, I became The Voice, and thank God nobody thought about the flat chest anymore. And the girls absolutely, I rose. And wherever we went later on, because we had to tour later on Turkey, and we had to sing and dance because we had a contract. And the agent, when it's finished in the theater, we had to dance in absolutely the most seedy places that you could imagine. We had to have a police escort from the nightclub to the hotel because some of the very rich Turkish, very rich people, they thought that they could buy us or kidnap us. So we had to have a police escort. And that was my life in Turkey. And it is all in my book because there is no time or not enough. I mean, when you buy my book, From Eurostar to Top Popstar, everything is in it. So eventually I went then to Germany. I went to the university because I had a choice where to go. And I didn't want to speak German because I felt that we used to say the good German is a dead German. And my mother said that it's very wrong to think of it like that. He says, you shouldn't hate, you should know it better than anybody how horrible it is to feel when people hate you. She says, we are all equal. And you should go to Germany to meet some Germans and find out for yourself whether all of them are murderers. And I did. And I went to Germany with the intention to be angry. But the only person I was angry with was myself, because I fell in love with the first German boy that I met, and he was wonderful. And then I forgave my mom, because I thought, well, she wasn't a slut really. She is just a young woman falling in love. And the fact that he was German and a prisoner of war had nothing to do with it, because look, here am I, and it is happening to me again. So I spent my lifetime apologizing for my mother. And then, of course, in Germany, my first port of call was a jazz club in Munich. And as I stood there, I said, is it okay if I join a quick little jam session? And they said, of course, all right. And of course, they liked me enough. They asked me to join the trio. But the man who owned the nightclub said, we don't have any money, but I can offer you food every night. Ooh, that was lovely. Every night I had some food. And then eventually, whatever they made at the door, you know, they had to plate, and they used to share it with me. And this is one day, a producer came in. By that time, I was in Hamburg, and he heard me sing, and they signed me up. And once I made records, my first song was, they were not amazing songs, but making records was amazing. It opened doors for me. But I never, you know, my memory with the Holocaust never left me. You see, I did films, I did records, I was recognized, and I was very surprised that it was the very German people who made me into a star. It is some kind of fate has got very funny ways to show how to treat life, because that was the last place that I thought I would seek. I didn't seek fame, it just came to me. And then I enjoyed the stage, and I enjoyed the fact that I was famous, but I could never forget it. When I looked at people, and I found that in Germany, people they love art, they're very arty. They have got something that they call Homekultur, Wohnkultur, which means they have a cultural living, and they are talented in music and in art. How could these very people hate so much the Jews that they would kill them? It just didn't make any sense. And I wanted to learn more and more. And the Holocaust memories never leave you. All of us who have lived through the Holocaust, we were damaged people. We still are. We are doing our very best to live with it, but we cannot forget it or get over it. My children, they're adults now, they do not understand me why I am talking about the Holocaust and how comes that I haven't got over it. After all, the war has been finished 75 years ago. They don't understand it. And I cannot explain it if they don't understand it. I can't explain it. I would have hoped that my own children would really understand it. And one of the reasons that I feel that I need to pass this on, because those people who haven't gone through it, it's very hard for them to understand and to imagine what kind of a stigma and memory it left on people. And when I came back to England, I came to England because I wanted my children to go to school here, because I like the ethos. I like lots of things about it. And in England, people are very welcome. And I've actually, before this, I've almost settled in Holland. And then when I had children and they went to school and they grew up, and I did all sorts of things, but I never wanted to go back to Hungary again because it was too painful. And one day my daughter and my granddaughter bought me a birthday present to spend a week in Budapest. And it was very amazing because the taxi driver was surprised how well I speak English. I mean, not English, Hungarian. And he said to me, "You speak a very old-fashioned Hungarian." I said, "Yes, I learned it from my grandma." Anyway, and the curiosity killed the cat, you see. I took a taxi and went back to Sondiuzzo 74. By now, it was not a derelict house anymore. They built it up. And I went, and there was this mosaic little courtyard still there, where I witnessed a girl jumping out in front of my eyes when I was 7 or 8. And opposite was a yellow star house. And the Germans just came to collect them all into a lorry. And this girl escaped into the house where I lived, and we were on the 3rd floor. And I just went, because I was not allowed out except outside the front door. And I was on the front door skipping or something when I heard this very big noise running on the stairs. And suddenly this girl, beautiful, about 15-year-old girl with long black hair, looking at me, saying, "Please, can I have a glass of water?" And about 5 steps behind her, there were 2 soldiers chasing her. So I went into the flat because she asked me to give her water, but probably she didn't want me to see what happened. And she jumped off the 3rd floor, not to be caught by these 2. And I saw her, how she was falling down. And there was this yellow mosaic little courtyard, and it was this yellow mosaic little stones. The reason I'm telling you this is because when I went back into that same house, which was bombed, the only thing that was left was this yellow mosaic little court, yellow mosaic things on the floor. And as I looked at it, I could practically, maybe it was just my imagination, but I could see the dent of her body, because when they removed her body after a few hours that she jumped, we all went down, all the people from the house, to see, and there was definitely a dent on the tiles, on this mosaic tiles. It was a little dent there. And of course, now after all those years that I went back, I stood on the same yellow tiles and I relived the whole thing again. And then this young man came out from one of the flats and said, "What are you doing? Are you looking for anybody?" And I said, "I used to live here." "Oh, did you?" She said. I said, "I lived 9 months in the cellar." "Oh, I've got the keys if you want to see it." And I felt how my legs grew roots. I couldn't move. It was like being stuck with a super glue to the tiles. I couldn't talk. And my daughter and my granddaughter said, "Nan," she calls me Nanny. She said, "What's the matter with you? You are sweating." I couldn't talk. I just turned and ran out to the taxi, went back to the hotel. And I said, for a day, I was in shock. I relived everything. I tried not to think about it for so many days, so many years. But then we got back to England and I sat down. And I think within about 4 months, I've written the book. And there we are. And then after I'd written the book, I was invited to have some talks in schools. And I had the privilege to share my memories with different schools. And I have dedicated my life now, you never know how long you have, to be able to speak for all those people who can't talk anymore. And to make people listen and to understand, please listen. Because humanity, it's almost deaf. They don't want to listen. And it's happening now. And if any of the people today want to have a future, they have to start it now. Tomorrow is too late. And you must not be bystanders, because one person who pulls the trigger is not the only murderer. All those people who say nothing and they have a voice, they're equally as guilty. And also understand that Jewish lives matter as well. Everybody's life matter. I have learned it in all those years that there are good people and there are bad people. There are people who hate and there are people who are ignorant. But you have to make sure that you are a mensch. Life is for living and everybody is equal. Because when you think about it, babies are not born with hate. It's only later that they learn how to hate. So try not to hate, and those people that you don't like, learn about them. Learn why don't you like them. You don't have to love them. You don't have to kiss them. But don't hate them sufficiently to deprive them of the human rights. And very often I said to myself when they say, Jewish people, you are the chosen people. And I said, please, could you please choose somebody else for a change? And just let us be safe. And just for a little while, be just anybody else and not be still anti-Semitism is everywhere. And now that the Holocaust Day, we are also in Eastbourne. We are very lucky that the Borough Council is supporting us so much. And our MP, Caroline Ansel, and everybody, lots of my friends have joined to read poetry. I will be talking also about liberation. But you see, one day is not enough. It is basically a lifetime. But it is wonderful that at least one day, our consciences could be shaken up a little bit. And I just would like to beg you and ask you, don't join the mass hatred, no matter who they are. Hating is so wrong because you could be the next one who is being hated and singled out. And believe you me, that is horrible. So this is my story. And I would like to be able to talk to as many people as I can for as long as I can, because it had to be heard. It had to be acknowledged. In order to not make the same mistakes again, we had to try in each of us inside to do the right thing. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for inviting me. And now please ask me some questions.
Dorit, thank you so much for sharing your testimony. I have now heard you speak twice.
Did you?
And yes, I have, yes. And every time I hear your story and every time I've read about your story, it just fills me, obviously, with a sense of upset and tragedy at the horror you had to experience in the Holocaust, but also so much hope and optimism of your life
I want to
afterwards.
portray that there is life after death.
Of course.
Because it is, you can't live a lifetime regretting things, because then you don't have any time to live. And life is, but the older you get, the more you notice that life is really, as they say, bloody short. And
very true.
Life is for living, and people are wasting so much time on hating and greed. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I am so passionate about this human rights, because even Jewish people have the right to live. Everybody is the same. Anyway,
Yes.
your turn.
Absolutely, Dorit. Thank you so much. All I was going to say was just to emphasize those messages you've just so perfectly summed up for me. So thank you. We have gone quite over time at the moment. So I don't think we have time for questions, unfortunately. But I will
that's
say...
the most, you should have shut me up earlier.
No, Dorit, we always want to hear you speak, and that's the most important part. But we have got lots and lots of people in the chat thanking you for talking today. And obviously, on behalf of the organisers of this series of events at the University of Oxford, I also just wanted to thank you for your time and for sharing your story.
Can you just do me a favour? If you want to send me the questions on email, or whenever Barnabas can send it to me, then I will reply them in writing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How does that grab you?
Yes, we're more than happy to do that. We have got one question that's just come up in chat, so we'll do that one really quickly. But if anyone does have any other questions, as Dorit says, do get in touch with Barnabas or someone else who's on the organising front for these events, and we will get those questions to Dorit and she will answer them for you. So the question that's just come up is just about kind of how you view humanity after the Holocaust, and did your view of humanity in those first few years, you talked a lot about Germany, but you didn't talk much about your overall sense of humanity. How did you kind of struggle with those ideas when you were
First of all, because I was so young, it took me ages to realize what was happening. But I was just sort of thinking about life as such. And I looked at animals, and animals don't kill out of joy. Animals kill because they're hungry, and they kill to protect their babies. But humanity are enjoying killing. They do torturing people. And I was almost ashamed to be a human being, because I am not proud of what people do. And it is happening all over the place, not just the Jewish people. Anytime that you are different, that you have got different sexual preferences, or you are a different color, or you're the different religion, that is horrendous. That's terrible. That is inhuman. So many people don't have the right to call them human. How do you define what is humanity? We are supposed to be a notch above animals, but we are not, because we have to earn the title of being humans. We have to earn it. And by the way people behave, that is not human. They haven't learned. Does that answer your question?
You're very right, and it absolutely does. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to reiterate how important it is kind of coming out of this event and hearing Dorit's testimony, how much we embrace those attitudes and we really do take them forward in the future, particularly on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day, which is tomorrow. It's more important than ever to really think about humanity and how we as people can just be kind to other people. So thank you for that, Dorit. So I'm now going to just bring the session to a close because we have run over time. But thank you everyone so much for attending this talk, and thank you again, Dorit, for sharing your story. It was absolutely brilliant.
How many people were there in?
There were, I think at the peak, there were 20 or 25.
Oh, great.
So yeah, we've reached a lot of people, and please do talk about what you've heard tonight. Please do spread it with your friends and your family. But thank you again, Dorit, so much for being here tonight, and I hope everyone has a good evening. Thank you and good night.
Thank you. It was a privilege and an honor. Thank you.